All right, welcome to the Lovecraft Easing videocast and podcast. Today is November the 6th, 2016. And today we're going to talk about a new anthology, The Madness of Dr. Caligari. This just came out, what, October 31st, Joe?
Halloween.
Is that right? Halloween. So we're going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to do kind of the usual opening monologue here, and for about 2 to 3 minutes, and have everybody introduce themselves. And then Joe is the expert on this book because Joe edited this book. He's also a huge fan and I guess expert on the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the movie. I'm going to start with a question for Joe when we get there, and then I'm going to have Joe kind of take it over from there. And we've got Joe here, and we've got Molly Tanzer and Mike Griffin and S.P. Miskowski, who have stories in the book. So those guys will talk to you. Okay, so I'm Mike Davis, Lovecraft Easy, and let's do introductions for those who are listening on the audio podcast later on. Let's start with SP and work our way over.
Hello. Hi, guys. I'm SP Miskowski, and I'm a fiction writer, and I'm proud to have a story in the madness of Dr. Caligari.
Okay, Rick.
Caligari.
Caligari. Tomato.
I'm Rick Lay. I'm a writer, and I don't have a story in the anthology.
Hey, Molly, your turn.
I'm Molly Tanzer. I'm a novelist and a short fiction writer, and I also edit a magazine, and I have a story in the book. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for coming. Good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too.
And good to see you too, SP, after a few weeks.
Oh, so. Thank you. I finished my novel.
Yay.
Oh, awesome.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Mike Griffin.
Well, I'm Mike Griffin. I also a writer of story fictions, and I have a new collection out 6 months ago, and The Lure of Devouring Light, and have a story in Joe's book, The Madness of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, The Lure of Devouring Light, in case anybody missed that. Good book, good collection. Matt.
I'm Matt Carpenter. I am currently editing a title. We are open for submissions for Pickman's Gallery, Pickman-themed stories. But today I'm just going to be like one of the audience members at Oprah, listening to what everyone has to say. But, Mike, that means I expect to look under my chair and find a car key. You know, new car for everybody, and you, and you.
You're at the wrong show, buddy. Okay, so let's Joe.
I'm not Oprah, so there's no car keys floating around. I'm Joe Pulver, writer and an editor, and I edited The Madness of Dr. Caligari.
So I want to ask you a question and then have you take it from there, Joe. For those who have not, or I guess both, even if they have seen the movie, can you talk a little bit? Let's start with the movie itself, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is a 1920 silent German film, and explain what it is and why it inspired you to want to create this anthology.
Okay, you want the short version or the long version, or the really long
Well,
version?
you know, start with maybe explaining the movie a little bit,
Okay,
and
all
then
right.
go from there. Yeah.
Okay, well, it was directed by Robert Wiene, and you're right, it was released in 1920. It's considered one of the finest examples of German expressionism on film. It is particularly noteworthy as it is godfather to horror film and noir film. It's also inspirational on many different, its legacy is inspirational on many fronts. From music, which I'll get into later, to other film. And basically the story is you have this, a guy relates a story which deals with Dr. Caligari with a somnambulist who's Cesare, and I brought audio visuals. Here's
Good.
Cesare,
Whoa.
and people will, if I can get this.
That's Edward
a little bit.
Scissorhands.
Well, there's one of the influences, Tim Burton. As you can see, this is absolutely Edward Scissorhands. It's also Frankenstein. In 1926, shortly after Caligari, there was a film called The Bells, a Hollywood film, which was another police crime movie. And in essence, that's what Caligari is, a detective story. And in The Bells, the mesmerist, the controlling doctor, was portrayed by Boris Karloff. And if one looks up on the internet, The Bells, one will find that Boris Karloff's makeup for the film is Dr. Caligari. The hat, the glasses, the facial structure. And again, Cesare, tall, lean, the way he moves in the film is very Frankenstein. And we can carry, if people have seen I think it was Columbia Pictures, but I could be wrong, there was an American version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah, I saw it.
And in that film, the woman, Lisbeth, a lot of people say, oh, she looks really punky, you know. The leather, the way her hair is, the facial piercings. My first thought when I saw her in the film was how much she looked like Cesare. And I indeed heard the clothing designer once mentioned that that was in part, that Cesare was part of the inspiration for her visually. And we could talk about other visuals too later on, like the sets. This is a lamppost from Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. And that could easily come right out of, and I would argue if you look through pictures of the sets in the Caligari film, this is, so Burton owes tons to Caligari. But Caligari's black and white silent film. It's as expressionistic as it is visually. I would argue that it's not very expressionistic as far as the narrative is given to the audience. The narrative is pretty normal crime detective type of thing. It's fairly linear. There's nothing particularly odd about it. In a
Do you want to talk about the
sense.
plot a little bit for those who haven't seen it?
Yeah, well, there were two scripts. There was an original script, and then there's the shooting script. The film that we know, this film, the proper 1920 release, has a framing device.
Right.
Where we see the character sitting, and he's like, I'm going to tell you a story.
Which, by the way, for those who have Netflix, it's on Netflix right now.
And the story he relates is how him and a friend went to a visiting fun fair that came to town, and there was Dr. Caligari, the mesmerist, with a tent and an exhibition where Caligari opens a cabinet, which is a casket, and inside is Cesare, who is a somnambulist, and Cesare answers questions. And then we get into a pretty straight serial killer story until we arrive at the end, and then we have the second part of the framing device where we find Caligari is institutionalized. So it's a tale told by an unreliable narrator. But you know, that's it. It's pretty straight police crime thing, even though the police aren't central to it, but it's a mystery that goes along those lines. And it involves a serial killer who's under the control of a hypnotist. That's it simplified. There's, you know, so many layers. There's tons of different themes, and we'll touch upon some of that as we get into this.
Joe, the one thing I just want to add is that Cesare is played by Conrad Veidt, who people will know from Casablanca. He was the Major Strasser, the Nazi in Casablanca.
Oh yeah, well, oh yeah. I mean, you got to remember that this was a Weimar era German film, and made between the two wars, and with the coming of the Second World War, most of these great filmmakers and the actors and the film technicians all wound up in Hollywood. You know, that's why we see so much expressionism in early American noir cinema, because of the vast amount of Germans that came over and started lending their talents. And
you mentioned layers to this film. I'd like for you guys to touch on that too, not just you, Joe, but those who contributed to the book. You know, I think, Joe, you've read, if I remember correctly, From Hitler to Caligari. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, Siegfried Krakauer's examination of German expressionism, which came out in 1947, and for many decades was considered the benchmark on what to look at and for in Caligari, especially when it came to authority, and how authority is seen and viewed and accepted by the German people. And then over the years, two things happened. One, the original film script was discovered, which is different and says that Krakauer got things wrong. And a lot of other critics started chiming in about Caligari. And Krakauer's theories have diminished greatly in the last 30, 40 years. But for the longest time, Krakauer's theories about Caligari were carved in stone.
For example, the somnambulist representing the common man's willingness to do what he's told, go to war, fight, and die.
Absolutely, yes.
Because he's hypnotized by the authority figure to do so. Hey, John, I know you can hear us. Can we hear you? Try saying something. I'll take that as a no.
Yeah.
Check your settings. If you move your cursor to the middle of the screen, you'll see a settings button there, and see if you got the right microphone hooked up. Okay, so to get back to that, any of you want to touch on that?
Apparently not. Well, and
we'll authority is good.
We're gonna get to each of the four that contributed, and I was also hoping that we can cajole them into reading an excerpt from their own work.
Whatever you guys want.
They're all so good. But a few of the writers did indeed look at war and/or the power of politics and authority over the masses. But that theme is pursued by some of the writers in the anthology. Did you have another question, or?
No, that was it. I just wanted
okay.
to ask you about that. I wanted more than anything your thoughts on it, since you're the expert.
Well,
well, I guess I do have a question. What made the leap from, you love this film? How did you make the leap to, geez, I want to make an anthology. I want to create an anthology inspired by this film.
In 2005, I wrote a story called A Night of Blood and Moon, then Holston Wall, which was rejected from my first collection by ST. And then shortly after, he said, hey, wait a minute. Because I wrote the story in a very expressionistic style where it's splashed like avant-garde poetry all across the pages. And ST said, if that was a normal looking narrative, that might be a pretty good story. Would you be willing? So I went back and turned it into a proper looking narrative, and it was published. But basically, my story was a prequel to the film, because I thought in the film we know that Dr. Caligari has been studying the journals of a 17th century Italian hypnotist who did the same thing that Caligari's doing. He had a somnambulist that murders other people. So with Caligari studying this and moving around with Cesare, he must have been other places. Serial killers, sure, they start with a murder, but I didn't think Holston Wall would be the first murders. So I went back and looked at Cesare, or looked at Caligari, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And I have this thing about jazz. And I'm, what if this horn player played with that bass player? And, since I wrote that, I wanted to read other Caligari stories. And I can look out into the community, and it's like, oh, what if he wrote a Caligari story? And, oh, she wrote this and this and this. Imagine that. Strained through her talent and vision, what would she come up with a Caligari story? And that was the genesis of the book. I pitched the book to many publishers for years and was told, that's a really great idea, but it won't sell.
Right.
And I just kept banging on the door until somebody said, go ahead and do it.
Which, give credit where it's due, that's Fedogan and Bremer.
Fedogan and Bremer, Dennis at the last Necronomicon, we sat down, we made the deal, and then I started running around the convention. You got to write something from this. You got to write, because quite a few people who were on my fantasy list for the book were there.
Right.
Cisco Langan, late Johnny Langan is not here.
Yeah, he has laptops having trouble, I think.
So and the people who were there that I wanted stories from, they all said yes, thankfully. And then I couldn't wait to get home so I could get near a computer and email the other people on my fantasy list. And they all said yes very, very quickly. So then it was just wait for these wonders to come in and read them and get giddy, which
one thing I would like to point out, there are, I think, 22 stories in this book. There are a lot of stories in this book.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have two that are very, very short.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Tremblay's, which is I adore to no end. I was beyond thrilled when he said yes. I was 10 times more thrilled when I read what he wrote. His story's only about 1,000 words. It's very short. And Rhys Hughes wrote a marvelous little story that looks at Holstonwall, which is the town that the film takes place in. And his story is just, I think it's like 2,000 words, if I remember correctly. That's also very short. So yeah, it has more than, at least, you know, numbers wise, we have more authors than might be normal in an anthology.
Well, we're lucky enough to have 3 of the authors with us, so why don't we swing over for a few minutes and talk to these three, and, you know, whatever you guys want to talk about. Talk a little bit about your story. Talk about, you know, why did you want to contribute to this anthology? You know, what does the movie mean to you? How does it inspire you? Or, you know, just whatever you want. Why don't we start with Molly?
Okay. Well, I had never seen it before, but it had been on my list for a really long time. So one of the reasons I accepted was that it would give me an excuse to sit down and watch it. And then it was like, why have I never done this before? It was really, really good. And yeah, I was tickled because like, coming from a humanities background, the idea of like conversations between art forms is really interesting to me. And so the idea of trying to write something that was playing off of the extremely visual, the visuality of expressionism seemed like a really fascinating challenge and something that I wanted to see what I could do with. So it was just a really interesting experience because, you know, especially as a silent film, it really is like a wholly, you know, visual experience watching it. And I actually watched it with the sound off because often I get very tired of sort of the stock soundtracks that they put with like public domain movie copies and stuff. And so it was just a really, really weird night. And I found it very inspirational. And so I was really, really pleased that I got the invite. Is that the whole question?
And why don't you,
the question was whatever you want to talk about.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Yay.
Why don't you give people a kind of spoiler-free thumbnail of what your story is? Or later on, I'll go through the whole list the way I saw it. It's up to you.
Oh, well, I guess I could do a brief introduction. So my story is called That Nature Which Peers Out in Sleep, which is a quote from the Republic. And it's about a video store rental clerk who is obsessed with the movie and has developed sort of a fetish surrounding it. And it's sort of like a romantic comedy, and there's no genre element. So I decided to just go totally off the wall with it. And that was really fun and sort of off-brand for me too in a lot of ways.
Video stores, I've heard of those.
Yeah. Well, there was a really great one in the town that I went to college in called Stardust, and so it's sort of a riff on that because yeah, it was this incredibly pretentious video store that was organized by a director, and everyone was mean to you when you went in. And it was also like a vegan cafe and place where crappy local bands would play. And so of course I was obsessed with it and went there all the time for no really good reason. But so I decided to set it in sort of a fictionalized version of that and have it undergone a revolution because the main character, the Symnambulous is really what he's called throughout most of the story, was hired there. And when he came on board, it was like a pretty douchey place like Stardust used to be, and then sort of turned the culture around and made it a lot more friendly for clients to come in. So there was like a fantasy element for me too, where it's like, wouldn't I have learned so much more about movies if only it hadn't been this like, you don't know who directed that when you go in. Well, you're the one who organized by director, jerk. So, you know, that was pretty fun.
When you took a video up to the counter, were they like, "You're watching that, really?"
Yeah, there was a little bit, and like I don't know, I'm who knows if it's changed since then. I think it's still around, but it definitely at the time, you know, in the early aughts, there was definitely the eye roll if you walked away with like In and Out instead of, you know, some, you know, really cool foreign film or whatever. So college town.
I'm guessing this. Well, I'm going to guess the clerk dies, but we'll see. Haven't got to your story yet.
Well, we'll sandwich Mike in between the two ladies.
Sure.
All right. Yeah, so my first experience with Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was in college. In I think my freshman year, because it was after I changed my major to film. So I was in my second year, and there's a year-long class that you had to take if you were a film major called the History of Motion Pictures, and it was sort of chronological. Each term would cover, you'd start with the very earliest experiments. And so in the first term, we got along to German Expressionism and Murnau and Lang, and then we watched this. And it was a big class. I mean, it was a really popular class because mostly what you did, it was sit in an auditorium that was basically a movie theater, and you'd watch a movie or a part of a movie, and then the professor would turn on the lights and talk for a few minutes, and maybe we would ask a couple questions. But it was a lot of movie watching. So it was popular, not just with film students. So we watched this film with kind of a little preamble by the professor, but afterward there was actually, I remember there being some dispute in the room about whether it was actually a 1920 film or whether it was something newer that someone was kind of messing around with, making it look antique. Because it's so striking and so weird looking, I think we in our modern sort of chauvinism think that people were never cool before the modern age, and people were never capable of doing something really visually shocking and surreal and as intense and just eye-popping as that film is. So, and so I remember thinking of this as being sort of the first, maybe the best of the German expressionist films that we watched. And it's also, you could argue, like Joe said, that it's the first horror movie. And also what really stuck with me after, in years of having not seen it, whenever I would hear about this film, I would always picture the visuals, the visuals that were not only the stark black and white, but the painted shadows and the bizarre angles, the surreal kind of impossible, like Escher-esque sort of angles that are portrayed in it. So the visual component, not to be superficial, but that kind of sticks with me a lot as an important part of why I love it. And also another part of what's important to me about it is the central part of sleep, being a somnambulist, and there being this quality of sort of madness or derangement that's attached to sleep and murderousness. So in my story, my story is not about a somnambulist, but it's about an insomniac who's, because of lack of sleep, starting to become kind of unhinged and becoming made more anxious by lack of sleep, to where his increasing anxiety makes it harder to sleep, and it's sort of a circular problem that he's having a hard time breaking out of. So yeah, so that was my inspiration for the story and kind of my origin story of coming upon the film.
Cool. SP, you wanna?
Sure. Mike, is my microphone okay?
Yeah, it is. It's no big deal. It just crinkles every once in a while. So.
Okay. Let me know if it gets too bad. I'll try to. Maybe I'll.
I'd rather have you with the crinkle than no crinkle and you gone. So.
No crinkle and me gone. I think this is one of those films that I was aware of for so many years that I sort of started to have that feeling that I had seen it when I hadn't actually watched it. It's just, one of those really important films that everyone supposedly is supposed to have seen. And so, and I was aware of the imagery, and I had seen stills from the film over the years. And so, and I sort of knew the story a little bit. And it's one of those things that you just sort of take for granted. So when Joe first suggested this, the first thing I did was sit down and actually watch the film all the way through. And it was fascinating. It was just so intense and so fascinating. And there was so much to it. And I think I watched it a couple more times, and I had the idea. I also started reading some articles, the whole Caligari, and I keep doing that. Sorry, Joe. Caligari and
Okay.
The 1920s in Germany, and I did a lot of research. I started collecting articles, and I wanted to write a story that was set during that period. I had that in mind all along. And it just didn't. I kept having images, and I kept having, as Molly pointed out, it's such a powerfully visual experience, that film, that I kept having visual ideas, and I kept having short scenes, but no story. The story just wasn't coming to me. So I decided that I was thinking about it too much. I was over-analyzing what I was trying to do. So I just sat down and I watched the film about 10 times. And then I just let it work on my subconscious imagination. And the story that happened wasn't set in the 1920s. It wasn't. It doesn't draw obviously upon the imagery of the film. It's actually set in the suburbs of Atlanta in the 1960s. But the thing that really hit home for me was that my story wanted to be a story within a story. I knew that I wanted to have a strong framing story, and then I wanted the heart of the story within the story to be more mysterious. The more you delve into it, it should become more and more mysterious. And I also knew that I wanted it to be something where you couldn't actually entirely rely upon the story at the heart of it, because it was told to someone else who told it to someone else. And that was something that really appealed to me about the film as well. So ultimately, I wanted it to be this mysterious take on who is pulling the strings, who has power and who is controlling whom. So that ultimately is what it came down to. It was much more thematic than I expected it to be, and I didn't really use a lot of the imagery from the film. But I think that I was sort of playing around with the same ideas that are in the film.
Absolutely.
You were. I get sent so much stuff that I have to read or should read that I have not gotten to every story in this book yet. And I suppose if I was really doing my job, I would have before the show. But I have gotten to yours, SP. And wow, that's a good story. There's a really
Thanks, Mike.
chilling. I'm not going to give anything away, obviously, but there's a really chilling scene in that story that I'm not easy to scare when I read, but I read that scene. I think you know what I'm talking about, and I thought, wow, I'd run out of the room too,
Great. Great.
It was very effective. I mean, I can't get more specific than that. It's just was very, very effective.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. Oh, by the way, I have read the stories by Mike and Molly, and they're both wonderful. I things that are completely unexpected, and Molly, I loved that. It was really, really charming and in the best way. I mean, just really, very unexpected and refreshing and beautiful.
Thank you very much. I haven't gotten my copy of the book yet, and so I haven't had a chance to read the other stories, but I'm really looking forward.
I would have thought you would have been one of the first ones.
I think it's being held hostage at the post office, but because I had cat drama last week, I just didn't make it there between that and work. So I'm going tomorrow, and hopefully.
Speaking of cats, Molly, you look like one of those villains in a James Bond movie. You're sitting there with the cat, and you're like, yeah.
The ham.
Is he recuperated from the lilies?
He seems to be doing pretty well. So I'm very glad to have him back, and that's why I'm sort of letting him take over the show.
Cats are always welcome to take over the show. I have cats, so.
Well, we can't see Kung Fu Johnny Langan, but let's see if we can hear him.
All right.
Am I here?
Hey! All right, John Langan.
Yeah, hey, John.
It could be me. I'm not sure. I can't see myself either. So
It sounds like you.
actually, Joe Pulver, do you know who this is in my screen image here?
I don't. I can't see it that well.
Oh, all right, Joe. I'm disappointed. It's a Doctor Strange villain.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It's Nightmare.
Is that a version? I don't know that version of Nightmare.
Feet of clay, Joe. Feet of clay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Nightmare normally looks like Cesare.
Yeah, he kind of does a little bit, doesn't he? Actually, this was an artist I ran across on, I think it was like IO9 or something, about like 6 or 7 years ago, who did these utterly brilliant revisionings of a bunch of classic Doctor Strange villains. And I swiped this one for my Google Plus icon, and here we are, opening weekend.
No worries, John, because most of the people, I'd say 90% of the people of my audience are people listening on the go, either on their iPhone or on the audio podcast version. So the fact that we can't see you is no big deal. But so that's John Langan, who was just speaking.
For those who are listening on audio, the photo to me looks more like the Witch King from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's got a little bit of that in it, I think. Sure, yeah.
Crown and a cloak.
I've never seen the image before, and it's not the classic Nightmare, which is what I'm used to.
But I am wearing a crown and a cloak.
Well, you deserve a crown,
Well, a cloak anyway.
Yeah.
Well, the other three writers just talked about their stories. Joe, you want to have John talk about his? And
I absolutely would like John to discuss his story a little bit, if he would care to.
I would be more than happy to, and I agree actually with SP. The other stories in this anthology, they're really, really amazing work, really strong work, and which includes SP's story as well. But her and Molly and Mike and everybody else have done just amazing work with what in some ways could be a really, really restrictively themed anthology. One way of thinking about it. What am I going to do? Am I going to write just a sequel to Dr. Caligari? And I really wanted to be part of the project when Joe told me about it at, I think it was at Necronomicon.
It was.
He pulled me aside and smacked me around a little bit and was like, listen, you're going to submit to this and you're going to submit to this on time.
I did have my fingers crossed that it wouldn't be too late. Yes.
Well, he had Michael Sisko threaten some truly horrifying things if I didn't submit on time. So I don't think I was either on time or only mildly late.
Are you ever late, John? I've not experienced that at all.
It seems to be the rumor. Ellen Datlow is currently stalking me. I'm in an undisclosed location, so that she can't find me. Or sent her team of trained snipers after me. I had the thought that at first when Joe proposed the idea that maybe I would do some kind of meta thing where it would be commentary on Caligari, but I felt, even as I thought that was a really cool idea, I also felt that's the kind of stuff I do a lot, and it felt. So for me, it felt a little too easy and a little too familiar. And I thought to myself, I'd really like to do something that comes at Caligari from this really kind of weird angle. And I was kind of interested in what Joe was talking about, the way that the Caligari story, the nested narrative, is often seen by cultural critics as a kind of allegory for the rise of fascism in Germany, but that framing narrative, in a way, takes all the power out of that. It's just, here we are in the insane asylum, and wow, what a crazy story. And so I liked the idea of linking up something from Caligari with some kind of contemporary concern, and in this case, economics, the economics of Dr. Caligari. And I wanted a story that was a horrifying indictment of global capitalism. How's that?
I've
Cool.
read. Yours is one of the stories I've gotten to. I'd say yeah, sounds about right.
Well, I wanted something that I don't, I don't feel I'm very good at like message fiction, if you will, didactic fiction or whatever. I feel I'm really, really clumsy at it, but I still wanted something that addressed. I mean, talk about real life horrors. The collapse of the housing market, the Great Recession, and just the way that things. It seemed to me that people, we just go to feed the beast, and I thought that I could tie the Cesare's box from Caligari into that. So in a kind of I would do honor to or at least I hoped I would do honor to that, whatever you want to call it, socially conscious or something like that, spirit of the film's internal narrative.
You did. Yeah, John. When John sent me his and I opened it and started reading, I was another one. I was giddy, and he's the only one that did something, and I won't say what it is because I don't want to get into spoilers. Because originally, when I had grabbed people, and of course I'm guilty, Cisco's the first one I grabbed, and I had him in this, Hulk Hogan lock or whatever the hell it was, and it's like, you will become Caligari, you must. I thought Cisco was going to do something along the line, touch on something that John touched on, but he didn't. And I got Cisco's story very early, as opposed to Mr. Langan's, who was, I think, only like 2 days late.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and I didn't have like 37 emails going, it's almost done, it's almost done, it's almost done, Not that I mind those at all, because it means you're working on it and it's coming from you, so I get extremely excited when I get those emails. So when I got John's, and at one point in the story he mentioned something, and I just went, "Oh, thank you! It's a gift from God." And the other thing is I confess, is John does meta so brilliantly that I did expect that's where he would go. So when I opened John's story and he didn't go meta, it was like, wow! It was I don't know, it was almost from left field. Not that I ever want writers on a leash. I love it when they're completely unleashed and do whatever the hell they want. That's why they get invited. I don't want to. Oh, let's see. We're gonna do a book about a little green elephant. You do the trunk. Because if you take them off the leash, you have no idea where they're going to go. And when you have a Molly Tanzer and a John Langan, when you have SP, when you have Cisco, you do not want to restrict these visionaries in any way, shape, or form. I mean, you read any of their work. That's why you're begging these people. It is not just their impeccable craftsmanship, but for their visionary talents and their imagination. So, yeah, John's was a complete pleasure, and that was it's great fun opening email after email after email and reading these things. Of course, a couple of people went and did M when I thought they were going to be closer to J. So when I was putting together the table of contents, which I sort of had a rough one in my head right out of the box when I invited people. Well, the table of contents always takes me a week to put together anyway. Um, but this one I think was harder than any other one. Also, the material is so dear to my heart. And I wanted to, for those people who read an anthology in the order that the table of contents lists the stories, I was hoping to get the flow good enough where the reader would enjoy the ride. It would make sense to the reader. You know, I mean, I realize you're always, as an editor, as an anthologist, up against, you know, somebody opens a book and it's like, oh my God, Molly Tanzer, holy shit, I gotta read that first. You know, I understand that. Except for in the context of anthologies, I never read out of order. I don't care if it says Laird Barron. I don't care if it says Gemma Files. As much as I want to get to those stories, I read them in order because I assume. Well, I mean, let's pick on Ellen Datlow, who's my idea of God as editors, as anthologists. I'm sure she spends a ton of time putting that table of contents in the right order. That's why, you know, I've been reading her books forever. She's just brilliant. You know, she's got the art down. I would love to sit and have dinner with her and give her money to pick her brain on how to do it. You know,
well, she's going to be on the show next week.
Yeah, but, you know, I'm like some newbie compared to Ellen, you know. Ellen's Ellen, for crying out loud.
Well, two things. First of all, I want to say to John that, and it's really difficult, I can't get into specifics as to why in front of the audience, but I really enjoyed your story too, John. So,
well, thank you.
And I am skipping around just simply because I knew it would bother Joe.
Oh, thanks. Screw me up. I'm not screwed up enough as is. Oh boy.
All right, so you said something a minute ago, Joe, about the material being dear to your heart. Talk about that for a minute, and why that is, and what about that is.
I'm not very young.
I know.
And I grew up in an age that wasn't the information age. I grew up in that 50s, early 60s America of Father Knows Best. When you know, so you didn't hear about films being made. You know, you opened the newspaper and you saw a little ad. And that's what you knew about the film before you went and, you know, before you went and saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All you had is this little grainy picture in the newspaper, and it said Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And you went, what? Oh my God. And you went to see the film, and it was what it was. But you did have things like Famous Monsters of Filmland and things along those lines. You had creepy, you had eerie, and images and representations of the visual work in Caligari was part of Monsterland at that point. Be it Cesare or, you know, the settings we're talking about, the highly stylized expressionistic settings in the film where all the windows are tilted and nothing. One of the things with the sets in Caligari is everything was painted on. The shadows on the wall are painted on. Lightning in the sky is painted. There isn't a window in Caligari in the film that's a normal, you know, rectangular window that's nice and level. Everything is askew. Some edges are rounded. So I'd seen these visuals from stills from the film over the years. And of course, I knew what they were from because they often mentioned it. And I was just dying to see this film. And I don't know, seems like it was the mid 70s. Went to one of these kind of dusk till dawn things at a local theater, and they were playing a bunch of. They played Nosferatu. That was the first time I saw Nosferatu. Which again, there are parts of Nosferatu that harken back to Caligari. They played Caligari. I don't know what else they played, because basically my recollection is they played them in chronological order, and Caligari just was mind-blowing in the extreme because of the visuals. They were so radical then, and as Kung Fu Johnny already mentioned, I'm a big Doctor Strange fan, even though I don't know that representation of Nightmare. And the visuals to me were Ditko-ish in a way back then. And I'm 61, so it goes back quite a few decades for me. And I was just blown away by what the film looked like. I also thought it was a particularly good examination of an unreliable narrator. And Poe and Robert Chambers I had come across much, much earlier as a teenager, and Robert Bloch as well. And those three people owned my dark universe, and they set me up to adore Madness via Jack the Ripper and Norman Bates and the King in Yellow, and unreliable narrators. I just thought, that's what a great medium that is. You're listening to this really engaging story, or watching this really engaging story, and you get to the end, and you've been belly hooked and followed along devoutly, and at the end, you don't know if it's true or not. I just think that's it presents this vast mystery, and I've always loved mystery. Even though we might have a nice little ending with a ribbon in it, and it may appear that the story or the film is all tied up and nice and neat, you throw in an unreliable narrator, and that's not necessarily the case, and I really like that, and always have. So yeah, that's where I started, with all these still photographs and magazines and whatnot, and until I ultimately saw the film, and then later on had the opportunity to buy a video of it, and then ultimately a DVD. I have not bought a Blu-ray of it yet because there's a couple of versions, and I can't afford to buy two Blu-rays of something I already own on DVD, and there are differences. Plus, I was never one, I don't really like bonus material. I don't want to know how the magic trick is done as a rule, but there are occasions where I want the commentaries, and Caligari's one of them. For anybody who owns a DVD of Caligari, my version, most DVD versions have a commentary track by critic Mike Budd, which he's very dry and boring, but he gets it right for the most part. There's a couple of things him and I have differing opinions on. But he does go into Siegfried Krakauer's theories and examines them well. And does a really, really good job, far, far better than I ever could, about what's going on visually with the film expressionistically, and how that differs from, as I said earlier, I don't think that the narrative of Caligari is expressionistic really at all. I think its expressionism is almost solely visual. But to this day, I think the visuals are still amazing. And one of the things we tried to do with the book, and Michael Waltz, who was our book designer, and did I think, a just fantastic job designing the book. We came up with title cards instead of just the story. You know, at the beginning of a story, it would say, you know, blah 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 by whomever. We did things like this. Hopefully, I can get this where you can see it well.
Yeah, and I'm holding one up too.
So, and to some people that they might wonder what the hell that is, because these title cards like this were from the original film, but later on there were more than one transfer where the title cards were done with more stock elements, and they weren't as fractured and expressionistic. So, and while I'm pointing out things about the book, this is the standard hardcover edition. It has this stunning end paper by Nick Gucker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. There's Cesare. And there's Caligari. And again, you can see how well Nick's presented the visual expressionistic style of the film itself. You know.
Now, FYI, I'm linking to this on the YouTube page and later on the podcast page and on iTunes. But, you know, if you're listening or watching, just go to Fedogan and Bremer's website and you can get the hardcover or the, I guess they got a hardcover and a soft cover.
There is, yeah, this is the standard hardcover, which is on the streets as of Halloween. Mm-hmm. The trade paperback comes on November 15th.
Okay.
Ebook is just about done. That'll be soon. And then there will be a limited edition hardcover that is signed. I'll point this out. This is a Gahan Wilson that's in the back of the book. And this is in the regular hardcover. That will be embossed on the cover of the limited edition.
That's pretty awesome.
And yeah, and the limited edition will again be signed by all the contributors. And like, here's the part of the table of contents, again, Nick Gucker. It's a really nice looking, wonderful looking edition, I think.
Let me flip back over to John for a second, because I think the other writers talked about this, but correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think John did. When you first saw the movie, John, and your impression of it at the time.
Well, actually, I was listening to SP saying, you know, it was one of those. I thought, oh, I had a nod of recognition, because I thought, yeah, it's one of those films you're supposed to have seen, and that is referenced in any number of studies of film, and, you know, studies of horror film or you know, classic silent film or whatever. So yeah, I realized after Joe asked me, I had it on my Netflix queue for a million years, it seemed. And when Joe invited me, I thought, well, I better watch this thing. Although it would have been entertaining to write the story without having watched it, I suppose. and I would have made him a superhero, right? So I watched it very recently, and I had that. I suspect that I had the response that a lot of us have. I think a lot of times we tend to feel that like we made up the world, and that we, all these sort of whatever cutting edge film or narrative or whatever techniques, somehow those are brand new, or at least brand new within our lifetimes or awareness of them. And so to go back to Caligari and see all these crazy things, all the crazy visual techniques, and it's interesting, Joe pointing out the parallel, which I hadn't realized until he said it, between a lot of the set design on Caligari and a lot of, say, Steve Ditko's drawings for Doctor Strange. Like suddenly occurs to me, there's absolutely a connection there. The way that the internal and the external merge, the characters' internal landscapes mirror or shape the external landscapes. So I was just I was bowled over until the end, and then I thought, what a cheat. Really? I thought, another, and it's sort of funny that I should be irritated at some kind of postmodern or pre-postmodern trickery, right? But I was like, seriously, it was all, come on, that's too easy. That's too safe, I guess, because what we had gotten seemed much more interesting. And then to have it confined, as it were, in the madhouse, I can understand why people are frustrated with that ending.
But if we go back, there wasn't the screenwriters said, they're long since dead, that there was no framing device. Now, when in 1958 it was discovered that there was an existing copy of the original script, which was never seen publicly till the mid-90s. We found out that there was a framing device at the beginning, but there wasn't one in the original script for the ending. And like I said, the two screenwriters swear up and down that they never wrote a framing device, had no awareness of it, and weren't there when it was done.
Okay, so dumb question. When people watched it in 1920, you're saying it wasn't there?
No, it was there. I'm talking about in the script.
In the script, okay.
The original script, and then apparently, because even in the main body of the film, there are differences. There are scenes like with Cesare where he does A, but in the original script, which was altered, he did B or M or whatever. The reception to the film by audiences, for the most part, was pretty positive. There were some people pass out. There were some people that left. But overall, it was a pretty positive, because again, the film, although visually was so jarring to them, and one can only imagine the heights of shock and wonderment looking up at a screen in 1920 and seeing that. Because even as a kid in the early 60s, I would have, I mean, we'll go back to Doctor Strange. Those early visuals by Ditko were just mind-blowing. We hadn't seen this stuff. Well, I mean, we'd seen it previously, because if you go back to the late 50s with Ditko's work in monster comics, we're seeing things, the embryonic forms of things that are going to transform into Doctor Strange material a decade later. But one can only imagine what it was like for audiences at that time, because even though Expressionism had been ongoing at that point for a short period of time, Caligari really just comes out on the field, and they just smack a grand slam out of nowhere, almost.
Let me jump in here, Rick. I think you had something a minute ago.
Yeah, I was going to say, regarding the ending, I think the ending has a certain ambiguity about it if you watch the movie multiple times. You have an unreliable narrator, but I think you have an unreliable debunker of the narrator, or at least a questionable. Is the asylum director at the end of that movie everything he appears to be?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, again, it's who's telling us the truth here? You know, can we count on anything here? So one of the things, because a lot of people are here, do we want to touch upon who else is in here and their work, or?
Yeah, you know, this is a hell of a table of contents. Ramsey, Campbell.
Well,
Paul,
I have Mike Davis to thank for Ramsey Campbell, because Mike was going to lunch with Ramsey and I was invited as well, and we sat in a wonderful little Mexican restaurant and had a delightful lunch with Ramsey and Jenny. And you know, I flat out told Ramsey, you know, I cannot pay you what you're worth, but you're a devout and unbelievably well-versed fan of horror, and I want to do this tribute to Caligari, which is arguably the godfather of all horror film. And so I asked him if he would contribute, and he grinned and said, yeah, he would. So, and he wrote, I think, a marvelous tale. And I thought it represented overall Caligari brilliantly. So the book leads off with Ramsey as an introduction to Caligari and the obsession.
And it worked out perfectly in the lunch, because we sit down to lunch and if I remember right, Ramsey sits on my deaf side. And so Joe was next to Ramsey. I'm like, you know what, this will work out anyway with Caligari. And so I spent the lunch talking to Ramsey's wife, very sweet lady.
Oh, yeah, Jenny is absolutely wonderful. So I was just, when we came out of that restaurant and we're walking back to the hotel, I don't think my feet were on the ground, because Ramsey Campbell said yes. And my feet didn't leave the floor the day I read, when he sent me his submission. Was, wow. Thank you. The next story in the book is Damien Angelica Walters take a walk in the night, and it's about a woman who, it's about a woman who has sleepwalking issues. The next story in the book was by Rhys Hughes, and it's called Confessions of a Medicated Lurker. And it's a story about the village of Holstonwall. And also at the convention was Robert Levy, and I had just read his novel, The Glittering World, which is friggin' brilliant, and I thought one of the two best novels released, you know, last year.
Great book.
Yeah, fantastic book. And I thought, I don't know what he's going to say, but stupid Joe, you know, I'm willing to go begging, hat in hand. And he kind of grinned and said, yup. And he wrote a story about a predatory therapist. And the sexual content is very heightened. And I had to put that in the book pretty early, because I was hoping in some way that it would almost be like the visuals in Caligari. We would go from Ramsey Campbell to Damien to Rhys Hughes, and then all of a sudden I would just slap the reader with Levy. It would, you know, it would be shocking. And then there's A Rebellious House by Maura McHugh, who I think is anthologists are not utilizing enough, and I really adore her work. And I've been lucky enough to publish her a couple of times to great pleasure. And then David Nichol, who, again, another, there's a bunch of Canadians. Richard Gavin, Simon Stranzas, Gemma Files, David Nichol. I don't know what they're putting in the water up around Toronto, but wow. So he wrote a story called The Long Dream, which, again, I think is great. And then there's a poet, Janice Lee, who lives out in California. And I really like her last couple of books. And her last couple of books have been dealing with issues of loss and whatnot. And she's also a fan of the director Bela Tarr and long shots. And she had written a staggering review of The Tour and Horse, which I was like, wow. And so I went begging. I said, hey, you don't know me, but how would you like to try writing something for blah, 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 blah? And she said yes. And I got a marvelous little story from her. Richard Gavin, again, doesn't have the vast readership that he ought to have. He's one of our very brightest lights. He wrote something called Breathing Black Angels, which is about a secret order that trained Dr. Caligari and what they might be up to. Then, of course, was SP's story, which we've already heard about. And then Nathan Carson, it's called The Projection Booth. And like John Langan, Nathan did something that nobody else did. And perhaps I should take a second here and say that there are 4 versions of the Dr. Caligari film, or 4 Dr. Caligari films. There is the original from 1920. In 1964 was Robert Bloch's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It was a Robert Bloch script. It's pretty much Caligari in name only. I enjoy the film. It's not a great film, but I like it. And there's a couple of visual tips of the hat to Caligari and Expressionism. And then I don't own, but in 1989 there was a version of Dr. Caligari, full color, dialogue, and very psychosexual, very erotic and strange psychedelic film that I enjoy quite a bit.
Yeah, I was about to ask that. Is that good in your opinion? You liked it?
Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. It is not work friendly. It is not kids friendly. Although there's nothing hardcore about it, there is nudity. It references all kinds of sexual activity. It's not for the kids, but it is this. And yeah, the askew sets and stuff like that, expressionistic things, are utilized. But this film relies more on color than on that stuff. And I think the dialogue in the film is quite good overall. And in the film, Dr. Caligari is a woman this time. And then in 2005, there was this Dr. Caligari, which is a redo of the film. And what they did with this particular film was the director cut the people out of the film and left all the sets. Then he took live actors and put them up against the green screen in the exact same positions with the exact same mannerisms and motions. And of course, they wrote dialogue, and he recreated the film with dialogue and live actors and pasted them onto the original film in the background. It's good. It's not great. It's enjoyable, and the technological achievement is fairly impressive. Um, but Nate Carson in his story, he references the 1989 erotic film, and I was so glad to see somebody pick up on that. And of course, one of my favorite writers, Jeff Thomas, gave us a story about a town of people who are, well, they have dreams, let's put it like that. And then I got the chance to publish Nadia Bolkin again, somebody who I think is just amazing. And that her story is called The Spirit of Sanctity. And it's about a queen and her struggle in a war with Dr. Caligari. And perhaps a traitor in the castle. When it comes to government and politics and skullduggery and whatnot, Nadia is just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I agree. I do think she's amazing. She's a very talented writer.
She is. I can't wait. I know she's working on a collection. I am so hot to get my paws on it. I can't tell you. I will be screaming when that finally, and I do believe that's scheduled for sometime next year. I will be all over. People will get sick of me yelling about it on social media. She's a gem, absolute gem. She has a few things online, and I would urge, in the strongest terms, anyone who is not familiar with her work to seek it out anywhere you see Nadia Bolkin's byline, run like hell to it.
Autumn Cthulhu.
Yeah, Autumn, there you go, which was my recommendation. I was thrilled you said, hey, I'll talk to her, and I was thrilled she said yes, and I was thrilled by your reaction.
Great title with that story, too. There is a bear in the woods.
Yeah.
But, yeah, she's very talented.
Yeah, she's a gem, absolutely.
So then next you got Orrin Gray.
Orrin Gray with Blackstone, a Hollywood Gothic, and Orrin, who is, Mr. Horror Movie. There's no doubt about that. And he takes his talents and great love of horror, and we have a mysterious murder takes place, and then Reggie Oliver, who is one of Britain's great secrets, perhaps not over there, but in America, I think. He wrote something called The Ballet of Dr. Caligari. Then we have that absolutely crazy, insane Cody Goodfellow. I have no idea why I invited him again. And he wrote Belmer's Bride, or The Game of the Doll, which we get some Nazis, which I guess kind of belong with the Caligari theme. Then some Griffin guy. I don't know. I think he sent me a big check to get in the book. But then when I tried to cash it was useless. So, but it was too late. We were already, looking at galleys and stuff. Then was Further Questions for the Symnambulous by Paul Tremblay. I don't have words for how honored and privileged I felt to get a story from Paul Tremblay. It's the shortest story in the book, and I was just giddy when I saw it. And when people read it, I think they'll understand why. Then my boy, Mr. Michael Sisko, wrote The Righteousness of Conical Men. And his Sisko, baby, he ain't like no other, and nor is his story. Then Molly, again, great honor to get a story from Molly. That's like having Christmas. She's just a brilliant writer. From a pretty mouth to vermilion, I mean, my word. And that's just tip of the iceberg. Daniel Mills, who is somebody I just adore his work. I think he's been hitting home runs since his first book, Revenants. He wrote something called The Sleeping Life, which examines war. And I thought marvelously, completely befitting something I wanted examined within the context of this anthology. Then Kung Fu Johnny Langan wrote To See, To Be Seen, which I already, kind of jumped up and down about and said how thrilled to death I was when I opened my email to see that. And the book closes with the Gemma Files story, which is called Caligaryism. And I thought Gemma's, immediately upon reading Gemma's, I thought her and Ramsey were the perfect bookends. And then just came the horror of, how do I put everything else in here? What order do I put them in? And print them all up and spread them all over the floor, and this could go here, and that would go next to it. Oh, no, wait a minute, this one, oh, that's too long. You can't have that and that. Oh, no, they're narratively, they're slightly similar. They can't go together. Oh. So that went on for a week, and then one night I vowed, that's it, I'm done. That's the table of contents. Then I got up and tweaked it again in the morning and sent it to Dennis. And it is what it is. Yeah, those are the stories and the writers. I'm biased as hell. These are all writers that I adore. I'm honored and privileged to get to work with. I'm jealous of their talents, I don't like any of them. They could leave a few really good ideas and words up in the word cloud for when I'm trying to work. Maybe I'd be a little better, but no, they steal all the good stuff.
So, question for everybody, I guess. I think it was Roger Ebert that said that Caligari, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, was the first horror movie. But
yes.
It's not just horror. It's what else is it? In your opinion, guys? I mean, there's a lot of noir in there. Yeah, Mike or Mike and then Molly.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say one little thing, which is there wasn't really a language of horror film to use, so because it was sort of prehistoric version of horror film. So I feel it's mostly a horror film with some weird and sort of supernatural, mysterious elements as to what's going on. But that mainly, to me, it's a horror film. But Molly, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I mean, this is always my response to everything, so sorry about that. But I really believe that horror is a mode rather than a genre, and so it's like a wash that we use to cover a canvas of something that's already been painted. And so Caligari, I think it absolutely, even though it's an early film, is using sort of what we come to see as the mode of horror, which is that people are terrified, people are shocked. It's suspenseful, it's scary, but it is such a prototype of so many different genres that it's interesting to see in that way. But it could be a noir with horror overtones, or it could be like a weird movie that is also a horror film. And so I think that it's a good example of why. God, come on. I do think it's a good example of just how diverse horror really is, because it isn't something that can be pinned down. It's only something that uses to color any kind of narrative that we choose to engage with. So,
absolutely.
Thoughts?
SP, John?
Well, I guess I was most fascinated with the psychological aspects of the film. So I look at it as a psychological drama as much as anything else. And it's a story of identity, merging identities and identities affecting one another. So I see it also as a psychological drama, aside from being a horror film, and I think that's what in particular drew me to it.
Yeah, I would just chime in and say I agree. The what strikes me is the sort of not just the psychological elements, but the way in which the whole subconscious becomes manifest on the screen. So it does strike me that it's also an example of a sort of hypno thriller or something like that. There's this fascination with what goes on in the night side of our minds and what might be made manifest. And I think there's some weird way in which it's uncanny in this sense that it's dealing with fate, that you find out that you're going to die tonight and there's nothing you can do to stop that. There's something that's really compelling and profoundly strange about the way that the film treats that. So it's it's a horror film or the proto horror film or whatever, but it touches on themes that are in some ways that go back really, really far. So yeah, there you go.
Can I comment? I think you sort of have to view the film in context, I thought, with what's going on in Germany at this time.
Yeah.
I was just thinking in terms of serial music, this is the time of the Second Viennese School with Schoenberg and his pupils, and they took conventional harmony and just completely turned it on its ear. I think the painting was very different at that time as well. I think it was part. The strangeness of the movie was within context of what was going on artistically all over Germany at that time.
Oh, that's true. And indeed, if you read Krakauer, if you read Thompson, if you read David Robinson, has one of the BFI classics, which is 100-page examination of Caligari. That's all discussed, especially Caligari's visuals in examined up against what's going on painting-wise. Ironically enough, the original music was not at all expressionistic. It was quite formulaic for the time. I know one DVD transfer has a straight organ soundtrack, others don't. And as far as legacy, musically, because there's something I want to mention musically, you have Bill Nelson of Bebop Deluxe, who did a soundtrack for it. The Avant ambient band Super Silent from Norway, they've actually played the film and performed live, creating new music for it. In the Nursery, this ethereal goth band, they actually recorded a CD, and they did a tour where they went out and the film played behind them. And my friend Brendan Peterson did a book trailer for Caligari, and I again begged Mike Griffin's wife, Lena, who everybody in the community knows well, but I don't think people realize what a talented musician she is. I've been a devout fan of her CD, Extended Gestures for Cello, for a long time. and she composed the music to our book trailer, which is called The Symnambulous Dream. And I wish everybody, in the book trailer, we use like 3.5 minutes of it. It's almost a 10.5-minute composition, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's chilling. I've been playing it constantly, tons, since she first sent it to me months ago. I couldn't have been more thrilled. I'm a huge fan of her work, and in some ways, I'm just as thrilled by her composition as I was by any story in the book. I almost wish that we could have had her composition, a CD come with the book. It just so fitting and so damn good. She's the only person who was not a contributor that I made sure got a contributor's copy of the book, because again, if there were any way possible, I would love to see the book come with her music.
Yeah, John?
I was just going to say, what's interesting too, maybe about Caligari, we talk about it a lot. I was just talking about it, a little while ago, as that central narrative being, the sort of read as this allegory for the rise of fascism in Germany and what have you. But it's also thinking about the film. It's made in the early years after the Second World War, or after the First World War, excuse me. And I don't know how often, because I'm still not hugely familiar with the critical literature about it, but just in terms of how we think about it and how you might present it to somebody else, somebody who hasn't seen it before. That's another way I think of thinking about it, that it on some level, the First World War produces, of course, gigantic trauma and gigantic the need for for all kinds of therapeutic responses to that trauma. And I think that may be in the background of the film as well, in some way, and it may be a useful way to think about it. It's expressionist, but it's also part, historically speaking, of modernism, and so that seems to me as well yet another way of thinking about the film, the kinds of crazy, highly charged landscapes in it. It seems strange to think about them this way, but they seem to me like something out of a D.H. Lawrence story. Everything is just really, really intense and really, really overdone. So there are other ways. Now, whether it's going to be a big sell to the person, your neighbor who hasn't seen the film, and you're like, oh, it's like D.H. Lawrence, maybe not. But just in terms of contextualizing it for, maybe it would. I don't know. Yeah, I'm thinking about Who's Women in Love? Who directed
Ken Russell.
Ken Russell, right? So Ken Russell's Dr. Caligari,
Oh, man.
that would have been interesting.
But that would have been a horror in itself.
Both of the screenwriters were soldiers in World War One.
Yeah.
In Krakauer's book and in some of the later nonfiction examinations, both of them, especially Janowitz, spoke about the kind of thing you're talking about, John. How World War One and what it had done to people and the psyche of the continent, how that had affected them. All of that's in there.
You can see why they were probably very rattled by that added frame. The sort of, oh well, now we can fix you, now we can solve this problem. But of course, that's not at all what they were trying to say or trying to do. In a lot of Alfred Hitchcock's films, he has situations where people have to turn to psychoanalysis for help, and they often tend to seem like they've been fixed up, or they've had a breakthrough or something, and of course it never works. it never solves their problems. Their problems become worse. Their problems become more extreme, and I could just imagine that these two people, having survived World War I and having written this this story with all of these deep psychological underpinnings, to have everything sort of tied up at the end probably must have offended them deeply. I'm guessing. I've read that they were very surprised and that they didn't care for the framing device.
Janowitz went on and on for a long time about that.
Right, because think about the way that in the internal story, you have the older man who sends the younger sleepwalker off to do terrible things. I mean, how is that not a metaphor for war? How is that not a metaphor for the old general sending the young men off to die,
slaughter.
to slaughter, to sleepwalk to their deaths, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the end, it's like, oh, no, don't worry. I mean, I guess you could, if you read the movie that way, you could see that framing narrative as even more horrifying, because at the end, it's still the old guy who's in charge. Mm-hmm. You're still under his sway in the end. It's just, he's running the asylum now. So he moved from being the guy who sends you off to murder to now being the guy who contains you after you've done those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, Joe was mentioning all the crime elements. They weren't as obvious when I first saw it. I was probably about the same age as Joe. I was a teenager in high school. But when I saw it now, I kept thinking Fritz Lang's Testament of Dr. Mabuse.
Yeah.
The classic German. It's got the asylum, it's got the hypnotist, it's got the copycat crime idea. Because there were like there's like this 18th century Caligari and this 100 years version.
You're right, because Lang and Mabuse were monumental, important works, especially here in Germany. So, and like I said, with a lot of the Germans fleeing to America, to the Hollywood film studios, early on. I mean, like I said, I mentioned The Bells in 26. That's a straight crime drama, and Karloff literally, his makeup is almost exactly Caligari from the film. The glasses, the hat, the mannerisms a couple of times in The Bells, just the way he shakes his hand and fist and whatnot. I've never A-B'd them, but boy, watching The Bells, it sure looks like it. Crime drama was really popular.
Rick, you were going to say something.
I was going to say I read long ago I had some book. This is like 30 years ago, so I don't remember the title. It was like The Films of Boris Karloff. And I mentioned that it was deliberately Caligari, and the person who came up with the idea was the movie star Lionel Barrymore.
Oh, okay. The Barrymore was in that. Now that you mention it, yeah.
And it's based on a play and a novel where there was a character who is only called the mesmerist, and he's not described. So they said,
I mean, just on so many
Caligari.
Caligari's legacy is so vast. With Molly and what John have said. As it touches on horror, as it touches on and can be considered in some way or shape a forebearer of noir film, of psychological thrillers, as Steve mentioned. It's just this great shadow that looms over so much of darker fiction.
speaking of that, and we're getting close to wrapping up here, I would like to ask anyone who wants to answer this question. All right, so obviously the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is pretty unique. But having said that, what would your answer be to someone who asked you, all right, I love the movie. Now I've read The Madness of Dr. Caligari, edited by Joe Pulver, and I love that. What else can I read or watch that comes close to the spirit of this type of fiction? What would you guys' answer be to that?
Kafka.
Well, movie-wise, Joe already mentioned The Bells, and I mentioned The Testament of Dr. Mabuse.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I would argue to some degree, look at M, which is a German film, starred Peter Lorre. That I'm sure most people know.
Nosferatu, the original Nosferatu, kind of has a similar
Nosferatu.
look.
After watching Caligari,
That was my Lorre impression.
I would have people sit down and re-examine Frankenstein. In literature, I can't think of anything. I don't know if anyone else has any other recommendations.
I think Kafka's a great answer, but I would say maybe the films of David Lynch. I think that is in the same vein.
For a horror movie that lifts directly from Caligari, there's a Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee movie called The Creeping Flesh, which uses the exact same framing device.
Oh, I'm unaware of that.
I think it's every time we do a show, it's increasingly obvious why Rick Lay is on this show, because he knows everything. He really does.
I know everything from 30 years ago. I don't know everything now. And Pete
Rick,
well, yeah, I was going to say what he doesn't know, Rollick usually fills in.
But Pete, why don't you throw in your 2 cents?
Well, not only does Creeping Flesh use the exact same framing concept, the scene at the end where you actually see Peter Cushing's lab is very avant-garde and nonsensical, and is very reminiscent of the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I'm actually a big fan of the 1989 Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and another
which I mentioned, yeah.
Right, but if you can handle hardcore stuff, those sets were actually used to film 2 other movies that are hardcore. The Party Doll A Go-Go 1 and 2. And they are worth watching if you can handle hardcore porn, because they have some of the same sensibilities.
This is from the 1989 Caligari.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
This is the same guy who directed Cafe Flesh.
Yeah, Cafe Flesh he did do right.
If you can handle hardcore porn.
Oddly enough, he also directed the music video for Wall of Voodoo, Mexican Radio.
Oh, okay.
Not that these are just random things that I'm thinking about as I'm racking through my brain. I think that Mike brought up Nosferatu as a good follow-up to the original. I think that there are some scenes in Dracula, particularly when we first meet Dracula in the castle with the long shadows, that are very reminiscent of the staging. I think those are kind of interesting to juxtapose.
Do you know who the original choice was to play Dracula before Lugosi got the part?
Go ahead.
Conrad Veidt.
Oh, there you go.
Really?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, if he had gotten Dracula, he would have gotten Frankenstein also, and we never would have heard of Lugosi or Koloff. He had a distinguished career, and luckily, maybe it was a good thing he didn't get in the horror movies, because he did more serious, well, mainly crime and espionage.
Yeah.
Thematically, one of the things I might want to watch is, what is it, Dr. Sardonicus?
Okay.
Which I think is
Ray Russell.
Yeah. I would throw in Svengali.
Sure.
As one of those, and there were any number of hypnotist, evil doctor, mesmerist films. I mean, that was there's an abundance of those back then.
But Svengali anticipates it was based on a book that was written before Caligari, and the reason why there were hypnotists floating around before Caligari.
Right, I'm just saying that
is probably derived from Cagliostro, was a con artist at the end of the 18th century who used hypnotism and had a lot of fanciful fiction written about it.
Right.
Yeah, I would also, I think SP was right to reference Hitchcock. I think Spellbound is, in some ways, it's a very different movie from Caligari, but in the sense that you have these interior landscapes that are put on screen and that the characters get to walk through. It's hard not to want to draw a connection between them. And when you, I think when you think about novels, Ramsey Campbell, one of his big early novels, Incarnate, is all about dreaming and all about a slippage from this world into the dream world and back again, where characters find themselves caught up in these increasingly and literally nightmarish situations. So, and Ramsey, of course, obviously is in the book, right? He's a big fan of the film. But his stuff particularly bears, I think, in a more general thematic sense, there's that same kind of creeping sense of unease and of unreality creeping into our reality that I think is in the film.
You mentioned sets. The really impressionistic sets from Son of Frankenstein. You okay, SP?
Yeah, had to adjust the light. It was getting really dark in here.
The sets for the Castle Frankenstein, for the Son of Frankenstein, are radically different from the sets that came before it. They're very impressionistic with these huge sloping angles and weird shadows cast everywhere. And once again, reminiscent of the Caligari. Anyway, I think I'm done. I hope I'm done.
All right. Well, anything else we need to say before we sign off? The book is, of course, The Madness of Dr. Caligari. You can Google the Fedogan and Bremer website and order it there. The hardcover edition is there now, Joe, or do I have that backwards?
the hardcover, the standard hardcover is out right now. The trade paper comes out on the 15th.
Okay.
And the ebook is very soon to follow. And the limited, I think, is expected around the end of the month. The limited hardcover.
So you can go to Fedogan and Bremer's website. If you want the hardcover, you can go there now, or you can wait till the 15th and get the soft cover. It's Fedogan and Bremer. If you want to Google that, and
you can pre-order the trade paperback at Amazon. That's been
right. It's also on Amazon. Yeah. Great stories and really beautifully put together too. Sorry, Joe. What?
We've had some nice reviews, and Caligari was included in the Washington Post. What was that? 6 books to look for Halloween. Which I was thrilled to see that in
Microphones
there.
of Madness did a really good discussion of each story. They did an in-depth discussion that was very good. Microphones of Madness.
Oh, good. That sounds interesting.
So hope
All right.
people get it. Hope people enjoy it.
Well, it was really good to talk with all of you, John. I was very glad your computer allowed you to be in here. It's good talking to you again.
It's been great to talk to you guys from the dream realm.
The realm of nightmare.
So next week we have Ellen Datlow, and we'll talk to her in the first hour and who knows what in the second hour. So again, thanks for being here, guys, and we will see everybody next week.